Well, hey, all you wiretappers out there, back here in the studio of Gangland Wire, same thing over and over again. Expect different results. But anyhow, I got a story for you. Another one of those kind of shorty stories I'm doing for YouTube. Let's go back to 1962, Chicago, North Side Chicago, Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was the boss, and Johnny Rosselli was really powerful. He was really had all the West Coast stuff for the mob, if you remember. Worked closely with Giancana because Giancana was really interested in Las Vegas, and Rosselli was the man in Las Vegas and LA. Uh, Giancana had been a silent backer partner of a really fancy hot spot, a new restaurant in Northbrook called the Villa Venice. And it was going to be try to maybe compete a little bit with some of the really nice restaurants and supper clubs in Las Vegas. He probably would end up with a game in the back, don't you imagine? Anyhow, and these two guys, they were always working a scheme. If you think about it, they're the ones that tried to do this thing with the CIA and really scam them, but act like they were going to kill Fidel Castro for the CIA, and they also thought that'd get them a get out of jail free card, which in some ways it probably would have if they'd have been able to get it done. And they also got involved with the election of John Fitzgerald Kennedy in, I believe it was 1960, and that didn't work out so well for him either, particularly because JFK's brother, RFK, Bobby Kennedy, he hated the mob, he hated Teamsters, and he was kind of a little man with an inferiority complex, I always thought, because he went after these guys big time. And he made it personal, especially with Hoffa and with Giancana. He made it real personal with Giancana. If you remember that, there's a video out there on YouTube that he says he's like is giggling like a little girl. So now in the supper club, this was kind of Giancana's. Oh, this was like his entry into more proper, higher society, and he liked that. He was dating one of the McGuire sisters, and he liked hobnobbing with the fancy people. It was a supper club. It opened around Christmas time in 1962. And at the time, the Trib and the Sun Times both gave it good reviews. And, they were able to sell out their grand opening because they were able to get Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr., or that's part of the Rat Pack, the part without Peter Lawford, which is a whole nother story. One Chicago newspaper, and I'm not sure which one it was that my research just quoted a Chicago newspaper said in 1962, it seems like old times to see the crowds and the familiar faces at the Villa Venice. I'm not sure which Chicago newspaper it was when my research didn't really say, it just said a Chicago newspaper observed in 1962 when it opened, they were quoted as saying it's been like old times to see the crowds and the familiar faces at the Villa Venice. We see Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. have done a 1 week stand, and the chairs were pushed together so closely that you couldn't even shove your way between them. There were so many people there for every one of those sold out shows. What was not known, of course, at the time to the public is that Giancana had demanded that Sinatra and his Rat Pack appear, and they had to do it for free because he was blaming Sinatra for the Kennedy administration's attack on the outfit and on the Teamsters. Now, in his defense, Frank Sinatra, in hindsight, we find out Sinatra had tried to get the Kennedys to back off the outfit, but he couldn't minimize any investigations. Bobby Kennedy was having none of that. JFK probably wouldn't have minded too much, but he wasn't going to control his little brother who had the Justice Department, Attorney General. He's all powerful when it comes to saying what they investigate and what they don't investigate. It's said now that Giancana was furious. Johnny Rosselli had gone to Sinatra and said, hey, this is still going on. There's the RFK still after people. And he had to bring the news back to Giancana that Sinatra couldn't get this done. There's one Chicago wise guy that even said, we ought to just kill that damn Sinatra and the rest of his little rat pack. Now, that guy was a guy named John Formosa. He said, let's show him. They say that he was a gargoyle-like dude. I don't know if you ever seen those gargoyles on those buildings, but they're up on the buildings, the size of old buildings, they have these things called gargoyles. So John Formosa was a gargoyle-looking dude who said, let's show those asshole Hollywood fruitcakes if they can't get away with this. It's like nothing's happened. Let's just hit Sinatra. I could whack out a couple of those other guys, like Peter Lawford or Dean Martin. I could take out that N-word, shall we say, and he used the N-word, Sammy Davis Jr. He'll put his other eye out. Giancana was above all that. He was smarter than that. He knew talk about heat coming down, man. That would be more than anybody could take. He said, I'll just bide my time. Don't worry about all that. I still got to deal with the Justice Department. I can do that. He said, besides, I've got other plans for those guys. So instead of killing Sinatra in retribution, he told Sinatra, he sent word to him that you and your Rat Pack buddies have to perform for free for a week at the opening of the Villa Venice. And I tell you, when that thing opened, the mobsters and high rollers flew in from all around the country. Right along courtside, shall we say, tables right up front were a guy named Joe Fischetti, who was Sinatra's pal from the Fontainebleau in Miami, and a mob associate, Marshall Caifano, Red Womet's buddy, the outfits man in Las Vegas, kind of worked for and with Johnny Roselli. About every Chicago top hoodlum, with the exception of Giancana, went to that grand opening sometime that week. I know I went to a Sinatra concert here in Kansas City back in, I want to say I was a sergeant back down in the early 90s, one of these latter concerts. And I tell you, the Bob was well represented down front at the Sinatra concert. Didn't matter whose name was on the paperwork at the Villa Venice. Everybody knew it was Sam Giancana's. They used an alias for him, Mr. Flood, when they'd say Mr. Flood said this and Mr. Flood said that. Got Sinatra also to arrange for some other entertainment. He got Eddie Fisher to come. When Eddie Fisher came, Sam was a little bit more conspicuous. He came in, sat in the front row with his girlfriend, this Judith Exeter Campbell, who was also sleeping with the president, if you remember at the time. I tell you, it was a different world back then. In those days, the mob and politicians and entertainers were all intertwined. You don't have that anymore at all. That night I get going, and Rat Pack are all dressed in tuxedos, and Dean Martin, he always would make jokes about the mob. I was listening to a Rat Pack performance once, and he said something about it. He said, I think I own a little bit of the Sands here. He said, I own 3 points and a gangster, I believe. And everybody laughed. That night, he said, hold the noise down. Pointed up to an apartment overlooking the stage, or like a booth up over the stages. There's a gangster sleeping up there. Sinatra arranged for a stream of entertainers to play the Villa Venice, and they had big crowds for quite a while. It was really interesting. They had some kind of, it's like out the Bellagio, they had some kind of Venetian boats manned by gondoliers who steered them across a man-made canal to an 800-seat auditorium. And between the shows, the big spenders shuttled back and forth to a nearby Quonset hut, where a casino was set up, basically a casino with gambling tables, roulette wheels, dice tables, blackjack games, and they were all crooked, but these were big enticements for everybody in Chicago. He was trying to recreate Las Vegas in Northbrook, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. I tell you what, you got to admire the moxie of Sam Gianacana. It's estimated that Giancana took in, and I don't know exactly how much he made, but as much as $3 million from the gambling out back. And plus you got the cover charges for going in. And when you got people appearing for free, it's practically all profit. Bureau knew about it. He knew at the time, they even knew that this was a command performance by Sinatra and his Rat Pack friends. Other performers who were a little bit reluctant they also appeared because, nobody wanted to, everybody wanted to get along in that business. Everybody wanted Frank Sinatra's approval. So this is a pretty easy way to get it. Sammy Davis would explain, baby, let me say this. I got one eye, and that one eye sees a lot of things that my brain tells me I shouldn't talk about, because my brain says that if I do, my one eye might not be seeing anything at all after a while. During a rendition at the Villa Venice, they were singing "The Lady Is a Tramp," and Dean Martin worked in a little joke there. He said, "I love Chicago. It's carefree and gay. I'd even work here without any pay." But you know what? I mentioned Peter Lawford being missing, and he was the go-to, the connect between Sinatra and the president, because he was the president's brother-in-law, married to Kennedy, one of the president's sisters. And Sinatra had dumped him from the Rat Pack by this point in time. He probably wouldn't have been able to appear anyhow. He would have known that he should not appear at this. It was a big reversal, because during the 50s, Peter Lawford had introduced Sinatra to Jack Kennedy, and all that swinging entertainment world of Las Vegas and Los Angeles, with all the actresses and the beautiful young girls were in that world. And we all know now Jack Kennedy liked that world. It carried him all through the 60 election, but as when Bobby Kennedy took over the Justice Department, they already had a big thick dossier on Giancana and on Johnny Rosselli. And he, once Bobby Kennedy got into those papers, he told his brother, said, "You got to steer clear of Sinatra, because he is in bed with these mob guys." I didn't know a lot about the CIA's recruitment of Giancana and Rosselli at the time, but that was part of the whole thing. And the president needs to he's got to stay way above all those kinds of things. Peter Lawford had tried to intervene and stop Bobby Kennedy's campaign on the mob, but that'd been rebuffed too. He said, as much as I like Frank, I can't go there. The president said, Bobby is handling Giancana, and there's nothing I can do about it. President's advisors told him, says, you got to stay away from this Frank Sinatra dude, as well as his brother. He told Peter Lawford, he said, you got to tell Frank that I can't really be around him. As a matter of fact, at the time, it was a kind of well-known story, he had a trip set up to go out to Frank's California home. I think it was out in Palm Springs, maybe, because it was nearby a place owned by Bing Crosby, and I believe that was Palm Springs. Sinatra was stunned by this rebuff. To him, it came out of nowhere. He should have seen the handwriting on the wall. He'd even built a special helicopter pad for the president to arrive at his house. He devoted a whole room, like with memorabilia and kind of an homage to the president, just for JFK. So it was. He was just stunned. He even had a framed note signed by the president, said, "Frank, how much can I count on the boys in Vegas? JFK." I mean, wonder whatever happened to that note. That'd be a nice little thing, little memorabilia to have. After Lawford called Sinatra, he called Bobby first, and he said, "What is this shit?" Nobody could budge. He couldn't talk to the president directly by this point in time. Anyhow, he couldn't talk to Bobby. They said Frank Sinatra was furious and threw the phone against the wall, and just was crazed with this. Then after that, there was just silence out of the Kennedy administration and out of Sinatra among his friends. He was devastated by this. Now, JFK, he liked Frank Sinatra, and it said that after all this went down and he heard how poorly Sinatra had reacted to this, he called Sinatra. And he tried to walk back the decision, and not really back, but maybe away from it. He said, Frank, he said, "I'm sorry." He said, the Secret Service is the one that made me do this. I just, I cannot be around you or with you because of Secret Service. But Frank didn't buy it for a minute. Peter Lawford later say that, Frank Sinatra never spoke to me again. And he'd been a really integral part of this whole Rat Pack thing. The mob guys, they were furious at the Kennedys for that. They had helped them raise money. They had helped them get elected, pulled out all the stops, get him elected. I hear that all the time about how they delivered the presidency for JFK by delivering Illinois, which Chicago can deliver Illinois. But, Chicago, was a union town. They were going to vote for a Democrat anyhow. JFK, I don't really buy that the mob delivered the presidency for JFK. I think that was a done deal with or without the mob. But they believe they did, and they believe that they turned on him and betrayed him. And especially after Bobby Kennedy started coming down on the mob so heavy, and he was really trying to build his political career off the backs of the mobsters, because he was getting a lot of press, a lot of TV attention for that. And there's always press in the mob. You go after those big mob guys, especially a guy like Gianacana, who was already in the press by, he brought it on himself, if you ask me, by having this girlfriend, this McGuire, a really famous singer. It was a Dorothy, one of the McGuire sisters' girlfriend. So, I mean, he was flying too close to the sun anyhow. And you know what happens? You know what happened to the dude that flied too close to the sun? He ended up getting his wings melted and crashed. So that's kind of the story of Rat Pack and the Villa Venice in Chicago and Giancana, and in kind of a shorter form. Then you can go way into deep depth or take a deep dive into this. But I just think it's an interesting story about the Villa Venice. Now they tried to create this Chicago, this Las Vegas type supper club, complete with gambling in Northbrook, Illinois. That's how much the outfit owned Chicago, Illinois. Bureau ended up taking it down. Didn't last too long. It's just too out there. You can't be out there that long by, the 60s, the middle 60s, with Bobby Kennedy taking everybody down and hiring a whole lot of new young assistant U.S. attorneys who stuck around long after Bobby Kennedy was gone. And that was just, the beginning of the end of the good old days for the mob. So thanks a lot, folks. I appreciate you listening in. Don't forget to hit me up on Venmo at Jinx Law, or buy me a cup of coffee with that Buy Me a Cup of Coffee app, or go to my website, the donate page. Every little bit helps. And if you feel like you have a problem with PTSD, if you've been in the military, just go Google PTSD and VA or Veterans Administration. They have a hotline. There's a lot of help there. And even if you aren't a veteran, you can start getting some help there, because there's help available if you feel like you're affected by PTSD. Watch out for motorcycles, and I appreciate all you guys listening in. And whenever you make comments on my YouTube, I always try to comment back. I know who you are. Thanks, folks.